In the small town of Cairo, nestled in the Maine countryside, a devastating fire had consumed the old mill. For weeks, the scent of burnt wood and mystery hung in the air, feeding rumors. Some said it was an accident. Others claimed there was something darker at play. But no one dared to ask. Everyone in Cairo has something to hide, people whispered, as if the town itself could hear. Fall in Cairo felt different this year. It wasn't just the cold wind cutting through the bare trees, or the smell of damp earth. There was something else in the air, something nameless yet tangible. They said the town held secrets, but no one dared to say what they were. Sam Keller had always found Cairo suffocating. At 34, he was back in the town. He swore he'd never step foot in again after running away at 18. His mother, Margaret, was in the hospital, and he was the only family she had left. The return to the old house, its hallways smelling of old wood and mildew, made him question why he had come back. But he knew it was guilt. He had left everything behind, including his younger brother, Danny, who had vanished mysteriously years before. That night, while rummaging through boxes of old memories in the attic, he found something he didn't remember keeping, an old cassette tape recorder. The device looked worn but still worked. Inside, a tape labeled simply Danny. When he pressed play, his brother's voice crackled through the speakers, anxious and broken. "Sam, if you found this, it means they're still here. Be careful who you ask. They don't forgive betrayal." In the following days, Sam couldn't get the recording out of his mind. Danny's words echoed like a dark refrain, sparking an unrest that kept him awake. Fragmented memories surfaced in flashes, laughter in the backyard during long summer afternoons, secrets whispered under blankets on stormy nights, and that fateful last night. He remembered the hurried footsteps of his brother on the porch, the door slamming shut, and the devastating silence that followed. Why was Danny so desperate? What did he fear? These questions, like thorns, pierced every attempt Sam made to move on. But it wasn't just the memories that troubled him. Cairo seemed darker than he remembered, as if the town had absorbed years of secrets and shadows. The streetlights flickered more often than not, casting fleeting moments of darkness that seemed to stretch forever, and corners that once felt familiar now hid something or someone. Even the wind seemed to carry whispers, murmuring incomprehensible words lost in the night. During a visit to the hospital, while holding Margaret's frail hand, she mumbled something through her delirium, her voice a fragile thread of memory and fear. They never let go, Samuel. They watched the mill. On the way home, he sensed he wasn't alone. Light footsteps followed him, stopping whenever he did. When he turned around, there was only an empty street, but the chill down his spine told him otherwise. Determined to find out what had really happened to Danny, Sam visited the town library. Among the dusty files and forgotten boxes in the old building's basement, he found local newspaper clippings and police reports. There was a disturbing pattern, a series of disappearances stretching back decades, all involving young people with some connection to the gang known as the Crows of Cairo. Scribbled notes on the margins of some pages suggested that someone, possibly Danny, had tried to piece these facts together before. Each new detail made the air in the library feel heavier, and Sam knew he was treading dangerous ground. "You'd be wise to drop it," said Clara, the librarian, her tired eyes and trembling voice betraying her fear as she snapped the book shut. "The Crows are still out there, and they don't like the curious. You have no idea what they're capable of, Sam. They don't just hide secrets, they destroy anyone who tries to reveal them." Sam pressed on, but Clara refused to say more. He left with more questions than answers. That night, as he lay in Danny's old room, he was awakened by a subtle noise, footsteps in the yard. Peering out the window, he saw a man standing in the shadow of a tree. When he flipped on the light, the figure vanished. The next day, he decided to follow the only concrete lead he had, the name of the Crows. Asking around discreetly in town, he discovered that the gang controlled the local drug trade and used the old mill as a meeting place. Danny, it seemed, had gotten involved with them before he disappeared. With equal parts courage and fear, Sam went to the mill that night. There, he found signs of recent activity: empty bottles, cigarette butts, tire tracks. But before he could investigate further, a voice spoke behind him. "Lost, Keller?" The voice was cold, almost casual, but carried an implicit threat. When Sam turned around, he found himself face to face with three men. One, tall with a scar running down his face, looked like the leader. Looks like the little mouse wants to know too much. The men circled Sam, their footsteps echoing on the worn wooden floor of the mill. The tension in the air was palpable, suffocating, like a rope tightening around his neck. He raised his hands, trying to appear less threatening, and said in a shaky voice, "I just want answers about Danny. That's all." The leader, a tall man with a grotesque scar down the left side of his face, let out a low, mocking laugh. "Answers?" he repeated, crossing his arms and tilting his head as if analyzing an insect trapped under glass. "Your brother thought he could play hero. And you think you're different? The world doesn't forgive fools, Keller. Not here, not in Cairo. Your brother thought he could leave. No one leaves the Crows." The scar on the man's face twitched as he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He took a step closer, leaning in until their faces were mere inches apart. "You know what that means, right? This isn't just about you, Keller. When you cross that line, everyone you know, everyone you love, is done for." His voice dropped to a cold whisper. "You can run, you can even try to fight, but we will always find you. Always." Before Sam could react, he was struck and fell unconscious. He woke up tied to a chair in the center of the mill, the three men surrounding him. They confessed that Danny had tried to expose the gang to the police and as punishment had been erased. The tape Sam had found was a desperate message recorded by Danny before his death. "You're just like him. Stubborn." The leader raised an iron rod. But the story ends here. In a final effort, Sam managed to free his hands and knocked over a nearby lantern, starting a fire in the mill. The ensuing chaos gave him the chance to escape. With the mill ablaze and police sirens in the distance, the Crows fled, but Sam knew this wasn't the end. They would come back. Days later, Sam left Cairo again, taking with him the answers he had sought and the weight of knowing that Danny's death would never be fully avenged. As he drove away from the town, memories haunted him. The sinister glow of the burning mill, muffled screams lost to the night, and the cold promise of the Crows' leader that it wouldn't end there. The Crows continued to operate, hidden beneath the silent facade of Cairo, and the town, as always, sank deeper into its dark complicity, each corner a mute testament to secrets never revealed. But he promised himself that one day he would return to finish what he started, not just for revenge, but to expose the web of lies and blood that surrounded Cairo. He knew the town, with its quiet streets and threatening whispers, held the key to unraveling the mysteries the Crows tried to bury. And with a new fire burning in his chest, Sam Keller prepared to face whatever awaited him, to keep his promise and make the town pay the price for its silence. It was almost midnight, and Chicago had its own way of suffocating someone. The air felt heavy, like winter, even though it was still autumn. The streets seemed emptier than Clara remembered, lit only by hesitant streetlights casting shadows as long as the stories people told about the alleys here. She quickened her pace, trying to ignore the echo of her own heels reverberating on the wet concrete. Clara had always known how to handle silence. It was almost a talent. But tonight was different. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just paranoia, she told herself. It was instinct. I should have taken a cab. The words slipped from her lips like a whisper lost in the cold wind. She hated herself for it, for the irrational fear, for the way her fingers gripped her purse against her chest. It was only 5 blocks. She could picture them in her mind. 1, 2, 3. So simple. But the 3rd block seemed endless, a chasm between her steps and the comfort of her front door. Deep down, Clara knew it wasn't a matter of distance. It was about that man. She'd first noticed him when she was leaving work. A nondescript figure, his face hidden by the collar of his coat, standing on the opposite sidewalk. There was nothing particularly threatening about him, just an ordinary man, with a lost look like so many others. But Clara wasn't one to ignore details, and the way he turned in the same direction she did was enough to spark a flicker of alarm. Now, as she crossed the street to avoid an abandoned building, she saw him again, just a few yards away, under the pale light of a street lamp. He was there, motionless, as if he had been waiting. Clara took a deep breath, pretending not to notice, but her heart felt like a ticking bomb. Just keep walking. Don't look back. It was a mantra she'd used before, taught to her by her mother years ago. The idea of being followed was as old as her childhood, but it had never felt so real as it did tonight. When she turned the corner, the sound of heavy footsteps behind her confirmed everything. Clara tried to rationalize as she quickened her pace. It's just footsteps. Someone going the same way, but the rhythm was almost imperceptibly synced with hers. Fast when she sped up, hesitant when she slowed down. She glanced briefly at her reflection in the window of a closed shop. A hazy glow returned the image of herself, slightly out of focus. And behind her, the shadow. He wore a dark coat, his hands shoved in his pockets, his face still hidden by the shadow of his hood. There was no rush in his movements, but there was no sign of him turning or stopping either. Clara needed to think. A plan quick. Only 2 blocks left. 2 corners until the building gate. She convinced herself that he was just some passerby, a man who, by coincidence, was going the same way. The idea seemed absurd, but it was easier to swallow than the alternative. She reached the red light at the corner and paused for a moment, like she was waiting for the invisible traffic of a deserted city. Behind her, the footsteps stopped as well. The silence was worse. The clock in the nearby square began to toll midnight. A deep, dragging sound, echoing like something inescapable. Clara felt her heart skip a beat. When she turned her head, he was still there, motionless, like a shadow cast in the wrong place. Why doesn't he cross? The thought came quickly, and along with it, something more irrational, anger. What kind of man gets a kick out of scaring a woman alone? That's what made her suddenly turn around, staring at the stranger. Are you following me? The question came out firm, more than she expected. But he didn't answer. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. The faint light from the street lamp caught a fragment of his face, just enough to make Clara want to step back. It was almost normal. Almost. He smiled. Not wide, but enough to show teeth that seemed wrong. Clara didn't wait any longer. She ran. As her feet hit the asphalt, the sound shattered the silence like a siren, and to her horror, the footsteps behind her started again. Faster. Closer. The building gate appeared in the distance, a rectangle of metal lit by the cold light of the intercom. Clara felt a mix of relief and desperation. She was close, but not close enough. The sound of the footsteps was louder now, echoing like a hammer against her skull. She pressed the button on the key fob, praying the gate would unlock before he reached her. A metallic click rang out, and Clara practically threw herself against the gate, opening it with all her strength. When she entered, she looked over her shoulder, expecting to see the silhouette standing on the sidewalk, powerless against the barrier. But he wasn't there. The relief was instant, but incomplete. She turned the key in the glass door leading into the lobby, locking it behind her. Breathing deeply, Clara tried to convince herself she was safe. The place had cameras. It had locks. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was close. Too close. The elevator was on the 6th floor. She pressed the button repeatedly, as if that could make it come down faster. The sound of the cables sliding was slow, almost taunting. That's when she heard it. Not outside, but inside. A faint sound, like something scraping against the glass door behind her. Clara turned slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. Nothing. The intercom light blinked on the panel beside her. She froze. Who would be calling at this hour? She didn't know anyone in the building who would ring so late. Shaking, Clara pressed the button to answer. Hello, her voice came out low, almost a whisper. Nothing on the other side, just static. She pulled her finger away from the panel, but the light kept blinking. The intercom wouldn't turn off. Clara, the voice made her bones freeze. It wasn't loud nor threatening. It was almost gentle. The problem was, she didn't know how he knew her name. The elevator arrived with a ding. The door opened, and Clara stepped back, her eyes still fixed on the glass door. Then she saw him, across the street, standing under a streetlight. Looking at her, the same crooked smile on his face. As the elevator door started to close, he raised his hand. A slow wave. Clara stepped into the apartment and slammed the door harder than necessary. 3 turns of the lock. A sharp click with every additional bolt. But physical security did little to suppress the feeling of vulnerability still crawling under her skin. She pressed her forehead against the cold wood of the door, trying to calm herself. That smile, those eyes, they didn't just look threatening. They seemed familiar in a way she couldn't place. Walking through the apartment, Clara checked all the windows, pulled the curtains, and checked the balcony door again. Every latch was in place. Still, the apartment felt different, as if the threat had invaded without permission. She remembered the intercom. How did he know her name? Her fingers trembled as she unlocked her phone, opening the building's security camera app. The screen revealed the footage, the empty gate, the lobby hallway, the elevator. Nothing out of place. But as she scrolled through the recorded footage, something caught her eye. The exact moment she entered the lobby, he appeared. Not from the street she came from, but from the opposite side, where there was no visible exit. He walked casually, as if he knew Clara was there, as if it were some well-rehearsed ritual. And then, he stopped. He looked directly at the camera. He smiled. "Who are you?" Clara murmured to herself. She clicked to save the video, but the screen froze. When the app restarted, the file was gone. Clara felt her throat tighten. What was happening? She had proof, something concrete, and now it was like it had never existed. Suddenly, the phone vibrated in her hand. An unknown message flashed on the screen. "Did you enjoy the show?" She dropped the device onto the couch and recoiled, her heart pounding like a drum. Was she delirious? There was no logical explanation, but reality refused to align with any reasoning. When a soft knock echoed on the apartment door, Clara froze. It couldn't be him. There was no way. She was on the 8th floor, in a building with cameras and locks. But he was there. She knew it before even looking through the peephole. He was there. Clara could no longer ignore it. Every passing minute, the weight of doubt suffocated her, but she knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. The man, the smile, the messages. Everything was falling into a puzzle that made no sense, but in some way, it was becoming more real than she could bear. The knocking on the door wouldn't stop. Clara glanced at her phone, where the message still flashed in cold letters, but before she could react, the phone rang. The number was unknown. Her hand trembled as she touched the screen. Clara, the voice was unmistakable. It calmed her heart for a moment. "Who's there?" she whispered, feeling her own voice crack. There was a pause on the other end. His voice, the same, soft and clear, turned colder. "It's no use, Clara. I'm already inside." The blood froze in her veins. She looked at the door, the window, every corner of the room, as if simply looking would make reality change. It was impossible. He couldn't be inside. How could he? The security, the cameras, the locks. All of that should have been enough to protect her. But he was in her head now, controlling everything, even manipulating her perceptions. He knew where she was. He knew what she was thinking. The knocking on the door grew louder. Not a regular knock, but a heavy, relentless thud. She walked toward the peephole, hesitating, feeling cold sweat running down her forehead. There he was again. The smile. He wasn't smiling anymore. Now he stared at her with an empty, cold expression. And still, he knew she was there, looking. Clara couldn't bring herself to open the door. She couldn't bring herself to do anything. She just stood there, frozen, feeling the pressure of terror building around her. But then, the voice came again, this time closer. "You don't understand, do you? You already know me." She felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Every fiber of her being screamed for answers, but there was something in her mind telling her that, when he spoke, it wasn't about an identity. It was about a destiny. And he knew more about her than she did. The pounding on the door stopped, but the feeling that the world was spinning out of control only grew stronger. Clara stood there, motionless, the phone still in her hand. The sound of her heavy breathing was the only thing filling the space. It was as if life, as she knew it, had been ripped out from under her, leaving a horrible emptiness in its place. She didn't know what to do. Her first reaction was to rush to the window and look outside, but the emptiness was as deep as the darkness in the room. What was she expecting? To see someone standing on the street? Maybe see her own reflection? She didn't know. The only sound she could hear now was the pounding of her heart, echoing in the heavy silence. Clara walked back to the door and looked through the peephole. The street was empty, but she felt he was still out there, lurking, watching. No matter how much she tried to convince herself that he wasn't real, something in her stomach told her he was there somewhere. And not just outside her house, but inside it. Inside her, in a way she couldn't explain. The memory of his voice haunted her. "You already know me." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a cold certainty. The way he knew everything about her, her deepest fears, her flaws, as if he had always known her. Fear swallowed her whole. The terror wasn't just in the words or the knocks at the door. It was in her mind, spreading through the shadows, turning every corner of her life into a prison. Clara tried to take a deep breath, but the walls seemed to close in, one by one. It was as if the world was crumbling around her, and she couldn't escape anymore. The weight in Clara's throat didn't ease in the days that followed, but somehow she started to resist. She tried to rationalize it, something that kept her anchored to reality. Maybe it was just a cruel prank. Maybe some neighbor was responsible for the knocks on the door, or it was some dirty trick of the mind that had gotten lost in the last few days. But a voice in her head, that voice insisted it wasn't any of that. It couldn't be. She began to investigate. She no longer knew who to trust, but there was something inside her that wanted to uncover the truth. Something crawled out from the shadows and wanted to fight. Her eyes fixed on the security cameras she had installed months before. Maybe it was time to use them for something more than just prevention. She sat in front of the computer screen, her fingers trembling as they moved the mouse. Clara watched the footage, fast-forwarding from one day to the next, night after night, until the knock sound appeared. His movement. The figure at the door. There was no doubt. He was there. The man or whatever it was watching as if he knew she would see this one day. Anger overtook her, and the anger sparked a flame of something she didn't know she had. Courage. She didn't know how or when, but he wanted more than just to watch her. He wanted to be a part of her life, of her fears. The answer wasn't hiding anymore. She knew what she had to do. She wouldn't be the victim anymore. And he would learn, in the most painful way, that he wouldn't be welcome. The plan was simple, although Clara knew each step took her deeper into dark and unpredictable territory. She still didn't know if the creature haunting her was purely human, or if it was a shadow stretching beyond understanding. But it was time to confront him. With the cameras strategically placed, she prepared the house like a battlefield. The lights were off, except for the dim glow of the monitor, reflecting her tense and determined face. Clara had spent the last few days reviewing the videos, the pulse of each night, every minute detail. How he approached, how he looked, how he slithered. She knew not to trust any reflection or movement. Her mind could be her greatest enemy now, but Clara was determined. He knew the way to her door, but Clara knew the way to the confrontation. She was the hunter now. The preparation wasn't just about gadgets and tools. It was a state of mind to plunge into her own darkness, where fear could be faced and perhaps overcome. Clara positioned herself in a corner of the room, out of the camera's reach, far from the light. She knew he would come. The minutes dragged on. She heard the sound of breathing in the stillness of the night, the faint creak of wood under his feet. He was there. She could feel his presence. He was watching her, but Clara didn't move. Not yet. Everything was ready. When the door opened, she wouldn't just be a victim. She would be the prey. The door creaked, a sound muffled by the thick darkness that dominated the house. Clara didn't move. She just watched, her pulse pounding in her chest. He was there, on the other side, where the light died and the shadow took over. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him like an almost palpable presence, pressing the air around her. Time seemed to stretch, and Clara's soft breathing filled the void. She didn't know what would happen when the door opened completely, but she knew there would be no turning back. Not anymore. Then he appeared. First, a subtle movement, a flicker of shadow at the threshold. A face, but not a human face. It was more like a suggestion of something grotesque, a deformity, a fragmented image distorting with every second. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't falter. The man, or whatever it was, advanced slowly, as if it had all the time in the world. His hands were long, disproportionate, and each step made the sound of something dragging on the floor. The reflection of his face, if it could be called a reflection, seemed to move independently of his body, as if his form was made of fragments of shadows. Clara tightened her grip on the sharp blade she held. There would be no more running. The blade would cut through reality, break the rules he followed. Or he would consume her. She didn't know, but something inside her said this would be the decisive moment. The air thickened, the shadows almost breathing. Whatever it was there. Now, Clara wasn't just a spectator. She was ready to face the monster. And the monster was watching her too. The sound of the blade slicing through the air was the last sound before absolute silence. Clara looked at the knife in her hand, her distorted reflection in the metal. There was nothing left. The monster was there, but what it was now, she couldn't say. What remained of it was just the emptiness of the room, the walls still trembling from what had been. She had faced it, and now, somehow, the confrontation dissolved into a strange calm. The blade hadn't killed the thing, or maybe it had. Maybe it had never been real, a shadow on the edge of reason. Clara allowed herself a tired smile, but her stomach still churned. Fear wasn't something that could just be killed with a single strike. She took a step back, and the silence was broken by a distant rustling, as if the house itself were breathing. What remained of the monster, if anything remained at all, was now just a stain on her memory. Something she would never fully explain, something that could never be fully understood. What was left there in the shadows was now just another story to be forgotten, or perhaps never told. Clara knew that the real monster wasn't in the shadows, but inside her. The nightmares, the visions, everything she had faced, still echoed in her mind like a distorted melody. The house was quiet now, but she knew the peace was temporary. Something deep inside her would never be erased. Fear doesn't vanish with the dawn. It doesn't dissolve in good intentions. It grows in silence, fed by doubt. As she walked toward the door, Clara felt a chill. He was still there, in the corner of her vision, always watching.